Okay, good afternoon. This week we're in the second Torah reading of the book of Genesis, which is Parshas Noach. Parshas Noach, the Torah reading of Noach, which tells us about Noach building the ark, God choosing Noach and his family to be the ones, to be the remainder of the world, or what the world will be populated from. So today we're going to talk about the story of Noach. Unfortunately, over the past 2 weeks, in the land of Israel, not such great news came out. And we have 13 soldiers, 20 soldiers who were killed for, and we always say, Ad Mosai, when is this going to stop already? But if we look at the situation in the world, we look at what's going on, one can look at the news and say, what's going on over here? If you look at the news, majority of the news, at least that's what I hear because I don't look at the news, but the majority of the news is about Israel, the Middle East, and everything else. So this Jew once said, who do you think runs the world? You think Biden is the one that runs the world? You think America, Russia? No, it's all Israel. If Israel attacks Iran, then the Middle East will be quiet, won't be quiet. It's all about what Israel does. All of a sudden, that's the whole humble tumble of what's going on in the world. The end of the day is everybody, whether we like it or not, Israel is the smallest country. If you ask an average non-Jew, what's the Jewish percentage in the world? What would they tell you? 50%. Say 50%? Oh, okay, 40%. At least 15%. An average non-Jew doesn't know that the Jewish people are 0.1 of the percentage of the world. The Jews run the banks, they run the media, they run the finances, they run the stock market, they run everything. They must be so popular. They're the ones that are against Israel, the ones that are pro-Israel. They're financing Kamala, they're financing Trump, they're financing everybody. So everything's the Jews, right? As much as we think it's a joke, we know that the Jewish people are given the responsibility to be a light unto the nations. And what is it within us about the Jewish people that we have this ability to, so to speak, be on everybody's mind and have an opinion about everything and be involved in everything when we're the smallest amount of people? Not only that, if you look at all civilizations of the old world, every civilization has come and gone. There are countries and nations that have been completely extinct. Ancient Rome, ancient Greece, ancient Spain, all been gone. The Jewish people, technically, after all the persecutions that the Jewish people have gone through, according to nature, and to all the laws of nature, we shouldn't be here. But the miraculous event of the Jewish people is that not only are we here, but we have an influence in everything we do. Not only an influence, as difficult as it may be, and as much as the war is taking a toll on the land of Israel and on the Jewish people and everything else, but what we've come to see, the dependency of the world on the Jewish people. Whether it's the technology, whether it's the ideas, the finances, whatever it may be, the influence and the fingerprints of the Jewish people are in everything. Part of what we talk about, the prophecy, that the nations of the world will go to our light and the kings will follow our suit, talks about of the time of the coming of Mashiach, when the entire world will want to know the knowledge of God. So if we're talking about that the nations of the world are following everything the Jewish people do, so what we're going to talk about today, as we mentioned, is the idea that the nations of the world were given the Seven Noachide Laws that they have to follow, and we have an obligation to educate the world and teach the world about these Seven Noachide Laws and to be a shining example and a light unto the nations. We're going to look at this and analyze it from the character of this week's Torah reading, a fellow by the name of Noach. What kind of leader was Noach? What kind of person was Noach? And we start by asking the following question. Why all of a sudden today the Jewish people are not called Noachites? Noachites is a term for non-Jews. We are called the Jewish people, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why is that something for the non-Jews? Why are they called Noachites? And number two, how is it possible, and we're going to go into this at length a little bit, how is it possible that a person who is the only person in all 24 books of the Bible who is called a tzaddik, and seemingly we don't really aspire to be like him? We even look at some negative comment about this individual, about why he was called a tzaddik, and he was seemingly punished in a way that we don't see his accolades being celebrated that much. Simply put, and what the outline we're going to discuss is, that Noach was not the paradigm of a leader that we should be following. While he may have been a wonderful person as an individual, and as a solitary individual, but he was a far cry from a proper leader. And what we're going to look at Noach in contrast to the other leaders of the Jewish people, and in general what our obligation as the Jewish people is vis-a-vis the nations of the world. We'll look at it from number one, if we start looking at the first descriptions that the Torah tells us about Noach. Now we know in general the Torah doesn't use accolades to describe almost anybody. You will not find a description for Moshe saying, the great leader. Doesn't even say Moshe our teacher. Calls him Moshe. Says he's a humble person. But nowhere does it say Moshe our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu. It doesn't even call Avram Avinu, Avram our forefather. It doesn't say Avram was a man of kindness or Aaron was a man of peace. So you grade the greatest people in the Tanakh, in the Bible. Nowhere does it mention any of their accolades, adjectives, or anything that they're giving them a description. Take even a few generations before Noach, Methuselah. He's the one that lived the longest. And the commentaries explain why did he live the longest, to the extent that the flood was delayed 7 days because they were sitting Shiva on his passing, was because he was a great tzaddik. Does it say anywhere in the Torah, in the book of Genesis, Methuselah the great tzaddik? We only know it because the flood was delayed by 7 days, and it was because of Methuselah, so therefore we say Methuselah was a great tzaddik. Take another person, Chanoch, the grandson of Enosh. It says he lived a very short life, 330 years. Ve'einenu, he no longer is alive because God took him, because he was a man that feared God. He died young. The commentaries explain, what does it mean, ve'einenu, he's no longer with us, but he's with God. God hired him and made him an angel. He became the scribe that writes down everything that happens. He's called the angel Matatron. In fact, there's this interesting Talmud that talks about, at the end of this tractate of Chagiga, where it talks about that Matatron was sitting on the side of God 1 hour a day to write down the merits of the Jewish people. Elisha ben Avuya, one of the great scholars of the Talmud, who had the ability to see what's going on high, and he saw seemingly a scribe writing and God listening. He says, what is it, two gods? And because of that, he became a heretic and left Judaism. So this fellow Matatron, who was Chanoch, one of the greatest people who became an angel, Torah doesn't tell us anything about him. We know it from the Medrash, we know from the Talmudic explanations, all along. But nowhere in the Torah does it tell us about or describe their accolades. The only person from the moment he's born, throughout his lifetime, that is given an adjective is somebody by the name of Noach. From the day he was born, for example, in Genesis chapter 5, last week's Torah reading, Lamech lived 180 years and he gave birth to a child. Singular child. By everybody else it says they gave birth to many boys and girls. By Lamech it says he gave birth to a child, Bain. If you take the word Bain in Hebrew, is the root word of the called Nivnet, to build. Why was he called that he had the Bain? Because he would be the one to rebuild the world, rebuild society. It goes on further. Then it continues in verse 29, and they called his name Noach. Why they called him Noach? Because he will comfort us from the hardships of our hands. What does that mean? The Medrash explains, and there are two interpretations. While all the other different types of people that so far that we learned about, Methuselah, Lamech, all the other people, it just says they were born, they died, they had children, and how long they lived for. The first one that we start describing what he did and how special he was Noach. So number one, we said that he was called a Bain because he was going to be the one to rebuild the world. Number two, he comforted them from the hardships of their hands. That means the moment he was born, his father Lamech recognized in him something unique. And there were two things unique he was born with. Number one, he was born circumcised. They knew already, tradition from Adam, that circumcision is something special. For a child to be born circumcised, Moses was born circumcised, all the great David was born circumcised, many great people were born circumcised. Born circumcised meant that this was a great in the person, so to speak, no perfection had to be done to, no change had to be done to this individual. But then there was something another unique need. Until Noach, everybody's hands were like mittens. And that's the way they would plow on the ground, that's the way they would sow. They would use their hands to be able to do all the different things. Noach was the first person to have separate fingers, knowing that he would be the one that now would create a tool as the sickle and a plowshare to be able to do the different things with the ground. Noach was the first person to do it.
But that is toes.
His toes as well. So Noach was the first person to have the separate fingers. Now the interesting thing is, there's actually an interesting lesson that they learned from this. Everything else that God created in the human being was perfect, right? Nothing changed. The only thing that changed from the time of creation until Noach was the webbed hands to the fingers. If you look at every single part of your body that can do something, good or not good, there's a cover that you can stop it. For example, you can say good things and you can say non-good things. So what do? You close your mouth. You have lips to protect it. You can look at good things and look at non-good things. You can close your eyes to protect it. Even smelling, you can make that you should breathe from your mouth so you wouldn't be able to smell. What's the only thing you couldn't do is, let's say, listen to things. If I have webbed hands, can I block my ears? I can't. Once I have fingers, I can use them to be able to close my ears. Rabbi Yedus Eibschat says, what was going on during the time of Noach? The people were corrupt and evil. God gave him the ability that he can close his ears and annoy and be uninvolved in everything that's going around. And the reason is because you see automatically, if God changes something in creation, that means there must be a new mission, a new task for it. And that was maybe to close your ears, to plug your ears. Now what's going on over here? So you see this child, who number one, they recognize the world's going to be rebuilt because of him. Number two, he brought comfort to the world. Number three, this child was born circumcised. Not only that Noach is a person who the world was happy with because he brought them comfort in how they're going to plow and sow. What is the last verse on last week's Torah reading? V'noach matza chen bein Hashem. And Noach found grace in the eyes of a God. If you take the word Noach, it's made up of the word nun ches. The word chen, which means grace, is nun ches, just the opposite way around. Noach is chen, that Noach found grace in God's eyes. Now, if you look at the word grace, what's the difference between beauty and grace? Beauty is for the individual. That means if I think I'm beautiful, I don't care what anybody else thinks. Grace means that somebody else thinks you're grace. It's all about somebody else. So, v'noach motza chen bein Hashem, that God found grace, that means what Noach was doing was the right thing. If you think about it, we say it in the proverb of on Shabbat, we say, Sheker achein ve'hevel hayofi. False is grace, and waste is beauty. That means a person who has a false beauty and a false type of grace, it's nothing worth. They say there are three types of graces that could be a lie, so to speak. There's three types of grace. There's a person likes where he lives. You can say where you live in the most disgusting place, but you're living there and therefore you like it, because that's where you live. Both cases, you like where you live, and that's why, even though somebody else might not like the place where you live, but if you like where you live, nobody's going to change that from you. It's all in the eyes of the beholder. The same idea is also a woman and her husband. Somebody else can say, oh, that person's ugly, disgusting, who knows what, but in the eyes of her husband, the eyes of her wife, every person looks beautiful in their own eyes. And the same idea is also when somebody buys something. You may not want that purchase, but the fact that I bought it is because therefore I like it. And therefore we talk about other people may say those things they don't like, or those things they're disgusted by, or whatever it may be, but the very fact that that's because you live there. The Talmud brings an example of once Rabbi Yochanan heard a lady say, oh, finally I can go back home to my beautiful place, and I'm leaving this place. And she was leaving Tiberias, and she was going to a place called Mizgah. So he went to find out where she's going to. It's a place where the only thing that existed in the city was two pillars. But that's where you're born, that's where you're brought up, you like it. That's the way it is. You like things not because somebody else likes them. Grace is in the eyes of the beholder. That means you're going to find grace in something else. The same ideas also we talk about. When Noach, when he was born, found grace in the eyes of Hashem. When we look at Noach is if we continue to look at Noach's accolades that are given to him in this week's Torah reading, the first thing that the Torah reading begins with, and it says that Eila told us Noach, these are the children of Noach. Who is Noach? Ish tzaddik, a person who's righteous. Tamim, he's sincere. B'dereisav, in his generations. Nobody else in the Torah does a mention about his greatnesses. Does it is called a tzaddik. In all of the 24 books of the Torah, there's nobody that the Torah clearly defines a tzaddik. The only one that the Torah alludes to as a tzaddik is Joseph, but not directly. It's hinted to. But who does the Torah clearly say he's a tzaddik? Noach. Why was Noach called a tzaddik? Simply, as we see further on, as when God calls Noach and tells him to build the ark, God tells him, Oischara isi tzaddik, I see you as a righteous person, b'doir hazeh, in this generation. And right away the commentaries explain and said, look at Noach. It's about the generation he lived in. Why was Noach so special? Why was he called a tzaddik? Because the generation that he lived in were people that were corrupt through and through. Immorality was something which was so rampant, it was unavoidable. Even the animals were immoral. Every single thing was completely struck with immorality. And over here you had Noach. He was able to be different than anybody else. For that itself he's called a tzaddik, because he was able to stand up and not be influenced by his people around him. The Talmud gives a description of how easily it is to be influenced by the people around you. That it tells us about a great sage by the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, when he talks about his great students, he says if you put everybody on one scale and Elazar ben Arach on the other, he would tip the scale. And he once moved away to a different city, and that city was full of businessmen and all different kinds of people. And slowly but surely he drifted away from his Torah study and became very involved in business. He later on testified to the fact, always go to a place where there's only Torah, whatever it may be, because you are influenced. And he says, I'm a proven test fact that you're influenced by your surroundings. So when the Torah tells us about Noach, and he says tzaddik, he's a righteous person, and then it goes on to say tamim, he's a sincere person. What's the double terminology? Tzaddik and tamim. And the Chidah explains that tzaddik, when it talks about tzaddik, righteous, means righteous between man and his fellow. Tamim, sincere, means between man and God. He was righteous between man and his fellow, that he did not fall into the immorality, into the corruption of the people of his time, who were stealing and unethical and everything else. And he was also sincere with God, that he stayed committed and he had a fear and a belief in God. So over here we're giving Noach all the accolades you can imagine. He's a tzaddik, that means he got along with the people around him, but he was not influenced by the people around him. And he was a tamim, he stayed sincere to God. In fact, Noach was a person who lived through two challenges in his time of people who tried to influence their societies. The people of the flood, who they were completely immoral, unethical, stealing and everything else. He was not influenced by them. But then after the flood, there was another generation, as we talk about in this week's Torah reading, the Dor HaFlug, the generation of the people who were scattered throughout the world, that wanted to build the tower and rebel against God, and also he was not influenced by them to rebel against God. So he was a tzaddik, that he was not influenced by the people of the flood, and he was a tamim, sincere with God, that he was not influenced by the generation of the HaFlug. So what do we see from over here? All these great, beautiful accolades and titles and adjectives that we give to Noach. But Rashi over here throws in a little monkey wrench into the whole thing. And he says, what does the Torah say? When was he a righteous person? B'doiraisaf, in his generation. If he would have been in generation of Abraham, you wouldn't even know he existed. If he would have been in another generation, why was he so great? Because everybody around him was so bad. So in his generation, he was a great guy. But in every other generation, he wouldn't even make it onto the charts. Now the question is, 1 second, shouldn't we judge every person favorably? Don't we say, you judge another person favorably, God will judge you favorably? Aren't you supposed to look at people and see what's going on? Look for the benefit of the people at the time. Why all of a sudden are we looking to throw Noach under the bus? Can we say he's a great guy and just leave it at that? Why do we have to say he's a great guy, but only in his time? And he's the only person that the Torah gives an accolade to. He's the only person that the Torah gives a title to or gives some type of compliment. And this also gets us back to our first question that we asked. All of a sudden, we're disassociating with Noach. Noachites, that's the non-Jews. What are we? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. To the extent that the Talmud even brings this as a law. If a person makes a promise and says, I make a promise that I'm not going to have any pleasure from a Noachite, he's allowed to have pleasure from a Jew, but not from a non-Jew. Because Noachite, by definition, means non-Jew. The Talmud asks, why? Why is it that we are not associated any longer with Noachites? We're only considered the children of Abraham. And the Talmud explains, because Abraham was the one of the forefathers of the three fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and therefore we're called after Abraham. The question is, but Abraham himself, who was his grandfather? Noach. Comes from Shem, who came from Noach. So how come we don't associate with Noach? There was once a great scholar, about 60, 70 years ago, earlier. His name was Rabbi Gedalia Moshe Goldman. He was a rabbi in the city of Zevel in Ukraine. The Soviets put him in Siberia because of his great offense of teaching Torah and being a rabbi. When he was there in Siberia in the labor camps, he and another Jew who was with him, very old, sick and frail Jew, was with him, were called to the office one Shabbos. They come to the office and they tell him, you're free to go. You just have to sign the document, you can go. The rabbi holds back a moment and says, 1 second, it's Shabbos today. I can't sign the paper. But they said, your life's in danger, you can leave Siberia. He says, yeah, but 1 second, right now is my life in danger. I got used to the confines of Siberia. It's not easy, it's difficult. But to say that my life is in danger this moment, I can wait until tomorrow, I'll still survive. Okay, so he doesn't want to sign the paper. They turn to the Jew that's next to him, the old, frail, sick Jew. He says, do you want to sign the paper? He says, 1 second, if the rabbi's not signing the paper, how can I go along and sign the paper? The rabbi said, 1 second, if he's not going to sign the paper, I'll sign the paper for him. They look at the rabbis, I don't understand. 1 second ago you don't want to sign the paper because you don't want to desecrate the Shabbos. And now you're telling me you're not going to sign the paper for yourself, but you're going to sign for him. So he says, yeah, that's right. Because for me to stay another day in Siberia, it's not my life in danger. But for him to be in Siberia another day, his life's in danger because he's old, frail, and sick. And I will desecrate the Shabbos to save his life. That's the definition of a leader. Not looking only for himself, but thinking about another person. Noach was a tzaddik. He was a righteous person. He did not fall prey to the people around him. He was not immoral, unethical, stealing, and everything else. He was a tzaddik, but a tzaddik for the non-Jews. Not the way a Jewish leader has to be. A Jewish leader, as we look throughout the generations, the people that were named after, Abraham, Moses, and the Jewish leaders that we have in our generation, are not like we talk about the people, not like a fellow like Noach. Look at Abraham. Abraham sees that God wants to destroy the people of Sodom. Terrible people. He begins to pray to God and says, 1 second, why are we doing this? Noach sees billions of people about to be destroyed. He's fine. I got my own little box. I got my boat. I'm safe. I'm all right. That's all that matters. My family's all right. That's all that matters. Moses sees the Jewish people sin with the golden calf. What does Moses say? Erase me out of your book. God told Moses, you'll be all right. God told Moses, you know what, I'll build a nation from you. You know what Moses told God? Then forget the book, forget me. I don't want to have anything to do with you. That's a leader. Not only somebody that cares about himself, but that cares about the people of a generation. On the other hand, Noach had none of that. Even more so. Noach was given 120 years to build the ark. Not because of building permits and bureaucracy and everything else. He was given 120 years to educate the people around him about what's going to happen. Jonah was given a few days. He went to the people of Nineveh, knocking on the doors like we read in Yom Kippur, that they should repent. What does Noach do? Knocking his ark. He's all right. His boat's safe. Making sure he's covered. He's good. A Jew knows that no matter what, no matter who, no matter when, they are responsible for another person. Look in the last year. Look in the last few days. Look who was killed in the army. Fathers of 8, 10 kids. Going in and saving another Jew. Why? How did they get killed? Because they were helping another Jew. They heard another Jew's in pain and suffering and needs to be saved. Without thinking twice, they run and help another person. The Kotzker Rebbe said, used to describe Noach, he said, imagine the house is cold. There's two ways how you can become warm. Either you turn up the heat, or you put on a coat. What's the difference? You put on a coat, who's the only one that's warm? Just you. You turn up the heat, everybody gets warm. He says, Noach in Yiddish, he used to call it a tzaddik in pelts. A tzaddik with a fur coat. I'm warm. Everybody else, go fend for yourself. I'm protected. I'm the one that's in the ark. I'm warm. He didn't think about warming up the home for everybody else. Many times the Baal Shem Tov used to say, it says in Psalm 93, I think it is, tzaddik hatomar ke'erez bavoni yifrach ke'erez bavoni yiskeh. A tzaddik can be like a date that sprouts, like a cedar tree that's in the Lebanon, goes tall. What is the difference between a date and a cedar tree? A cedar tree is tall, doesn't bend for anything, goes straight up, very tall, strong. A date tree bends to the side, and you see the palm trees, they all come down all the way low. He says, a tzaddik, there's two types of tzaddikim. You got to be a Mr. Tough guy. You're straight up. Everybody stands is afraid of you. Or katomer, you're there for every person, giving them the shade. A true tzaddik is one that has both. That's what King David says. Tzaddik katomer yifrach. A tzaddik is one who's there for everybody, giving shade like a palm tree, but at the same time, he's tall like a cedar tree, stands in his principle, and does what is right. What we see over here is a true tzaddik. The completion of a tzaddik is not a person who only thinks about himself. Not only who has his own life jacket, but one that creates a boat and a life that's for every single person. If we look at going back to the book of Proverbs, and going back to that Eshes Chayil that we say at the last three words, Va'at olisal kanlano, and you surpassed them all. Who are you saying it to? We're saying it to Moshe. That there was a fight between Moshe and Noach, who's greater. Noach says, look, I was in a generation of absolute destruction. I'm the only one that survived. Moshe responds and says, 1 second. You survived, but did you pray for the people around you? Did you get anybody else to survive? Only the people that God said, take your family in the boat and you were saved. I was in a generation where they were all about to be destroyed, but I saved them all, and I survived. So Noach says, yes, you're greater than I am. This is what we talk about, the stories of the Torah. We look at the stories of the Torah. Don't look at the entire book of Genesis, the stories. Not even about the Jewish people. Later on, it starts with the Jewish people. The first two portions of the Torah, the books of Genesis and Noach that we're reading now, is the first 2,000 years of creation. All about non-Jews. Why is it even part of the Torah? Not only that, if we look in the Torah usually doesn't talk negatively about anybody, even not about animals. And over here, the Torah alludes to the fact, b'deirasav, to tell us that Noach was only good in his generation. Why would the Torah even allude to something negative about Noach? And the Rebbe explains, because this must be a lesson that is teaching every single one of us. The Torah puts it in to teach us that when we are in a generation, we have a responsibility to the people around us. We have a responsibility to not just be a tzaddik in our generation, a tzaddik in pelts, to only warm up ourselves, but we have to also share the love and share the warmth with everybody around us. If you look, the Meshech Chochmah gives a very sharp anecdote that we learn from here. And he says, if you look at the beginning of this week's Torah reading, it says that Noach was tzaddik, he was righteous, tamim, sincere, saying how great he was. You go at the end of the Torah reading, what happens to him? After he comes out of the ark, he becomes a farmer. He's planting vineyards. No great accolades, just a regular guy that's, a regular simple farmer. Look at Moses on the other hand. Who does he start off as? An Egyptian fellow that they find by the side of the well. At the end of the Torah, who is he? A godly individual. Ish Elokim, a man of God. What does this teach us? You never lose anything, physical or spiritual, from helping somebody. Moshe lived his life helping people, and he graduated from being an Egyptian man to a godly man. He only went up. He only became wealthier. He only became better. He only became holier. On the other hand, Noach, who only thought about himself, went down a level. He started off as the tzaddik, and he ended up as the farmer. When it comes to helping somebody else, you become greater by helping somebody else. Not only do you not become lower, but you become better, you become healthy, greater in spiritual and physical from helping another person. When a person helps another person spiritually, this reveals within himself a connection that he has with godliness that he never knew he had. And therefore it only puts him in a higher plateau. And that's exactly what happened with Moshe. The more he connected the Jewish people with God, the greater he became as an individual person. So what we see from over here is something unique that we look in the leadership of Noach. His failure of leadership, so to speak, to take care of the people around him. The question then becomes is, why was Noach obligated to help them? They were evil, destructive people. They weren't Jews, they were non-Jews. Where is there any obligation that we have to help them? How can we compare the two of Moshe helping the nation of God who just came out of Egypt to Noach helping a bunch of degenerates, a bunch of evil doers? But from what we see over here, the very fact that the Torah points it out tells us that there is some type of responsibility that we, the Jewish people, have on every single person in this world, Jew or non-Jew alike. And therefore we have to do that, we have that obligation. As we see Abraham even prayed for the people of Sodom. Abraham even went to war for the people of Sodom. So the very fact that we see that from Abraham, who was the first Jew, teaches us even more so about our obligations that we have. If we go a little bit further, as we mentioned before, the first 3 Torah readings in the Torah, the first 2 primarily, talk about non-Jews. Nothing to do with Jewish people. But God put it part of the Torah. The first 2,000 years of creation are all about the non-Jews. That means more of the Torah, if you want to talk about in time-wise, is about non-Jews than Jews. The whole Jewish people is about less than 1,000 years. From the birth of Abraham until they went into the land of Israel. But the first 2,000 years is non-Jews. The Torah puts it in. What is it telling us? Why so long about it? Why does the Torah go on and on to tell us about the non-Jewish people in the world? It's because we, as Jewish people, have an obligation to teach the non-Jews the 7 Noachide Laws. And every single non-Jew knows that there were 7 Noachide Laws that Noach made when he came out of the ark, and that's why they're attributed to Noach, but they already had the obligation before, and then therefore they were punished with the flood, which goes according to Aleph-Bet. Number 1, Avram and Achai, not to hurt living animals. Number 2, to make sure not to curse God's name. Number 3, not to steal. Number 4, laws of justice. Number 5, idolatry. Number 6, not to kill. And number 7, adultery, not to commit adultery. And Maimonides explains that when Moses gave the Torah to the Jewish people, it was given to the Jewish people as well as the Noachide laws given to the non-Jewish people, and the Jewish people have an obligation in the temple times to enforce the Noachide laws on the non-Jewish people as well. So if you look as part of the 613 commandments given to the Jewish people, a foundation of this is the 7 Noachide laws to the non-Jews. If you look at this, it says in the time of the coming of Mashiach, we say it every single day in the Aleinu, V'hoya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz, that God will be the king on all nations of the world. That means all nations of the world will come to discover and see the greatness of God. The ultimate reality is when every single person, Jew and non-Jew alike, will recognize the greatness and sovereignty of the wisdom of the Torah. This is what we talk about, a Jew's responsibility. The Jew's responsibility is that even the non-Jew should see the greatness of the Jew. Unbelievable story with a fellow, his name was Kiwi Bernard, originally South African, lives in Atlanta, Georgia now. He's a motivational speaker, and his speech is based on, actually went to one of his speeches where he said this story. And he, based on a leopard, he's from South Africa, from the safari, he makes this whole motivational speech about a leopard. He was once asked by Microsoft to come speak by their conference in 2013, there was a deal, the first deal that Israel signed with a foreign, first time that was an investment from an outside entity, large investment. Warren Buffett invested in some type of company in Israel. And the company was very concerned The Israeli economy was very concerned that now Buffett bought the company, he's going to take it to America and he's going to move it out of Israel and everybody's going to lose jobs. So all the people, the news reporters and everything else went and to interview into Nebraska to interview what was going on. One of the people on the board of directors, Warren Buffett, I don't think he's anymore, was Bill Gates. And they asked Bill Gates, and Bill Gates is saying, listen here, I also want to invest in Israel, which eventually he did. But he says, there's one thing, he says, I'm able to buy in the world. I can buy anything I want in the world. And there's only one thing I can't buy. He says, and that's the Sabbath of a Jew. He said, what are you talking about? And he tells them that there's this guy, Kiwi Bernard. We hired him to speak for Microsoft. We offered him X amount of dollars. He refused. We thought he wanted to get paid a little more. He refused. He said, you're going to be on stage with Bill Gates. He refused. He says, it's on Shabbos. You make it on Sunday, I'll come. They moved it to Sunday, he came. He says, I realized you can buy anything in the world, but you can't buy the Shabbos. And that in itself gave him such a memorable impression that later on he mentioned it to a bunch of people when he was looking to invest something in Israel. But the idea is over here is that when a Jew stands firm in his commitment to godliness, a Jew's responsibility is to shine bright and to show the world that how we can be influenced on how we can change the world. And this is what we see even more so. If we look later on in Abraham's life, Abraham goes and he marries after Sarah passes away, and he marries Hagar again for a second time. And he has from her 6 children. Another 6 children. Why did Abraham have to remarry? To bring another 6 children into the world who weren't Jewish? What, there wasn't enough non-Jews? It wasn't like he was going to have another Jew. Not only that, he was told, Sarah told him, leave Hagar alone, get away from her, but as soon as she dies, he goes back to her. What did Abraham see? What was Abraham's job? What did Abraham look at the world? Abraham took his job that God told him, Av Hamoin Goyim, you're a father of all nations. And because Abraham is a father of all nations, what did he recognize? That the best way that I can change the dynamic is if I can birth into 6 non-Jews and change their way of influence from the moment they're born. That's exactly what Abraham did. And that's what he did by marrying those people. The same idea is also we talk about when Abraham brought the different people into the world, came into his tent, and what did he do to them? Then the world believed in paganism. Abraham was called Abraham of Ivri. He was on one side, the world was on the other side. But what did he do? He was able to convince and persuade the world and the people that came into him and tell them, you know what? Either you eat, and then we'll learn about it next week, either you eat and pay, or you bless God, and then you don't have to pay. He started changing the dynamic. If you look at the end of the Torah, in the Torah reading of Zayis HaBracha, we read in Simchas Torah, the Medrash quotes a verse where it says, Hashem is Sinai ba, God came from Sinai, the Zorach Meseir Lomar, and he shined on Seir. The Medrash says a fascinating fact. Before God gave the Jewish people the Torah, he went around to the non-Jewish nations and says, do you want the Torah? Do you want the Torah? Do you want the Torah? And they all refused. Then he came to the Jewish people and gave them the Torah, and that's why we have the Torah. Why did he go to all the nations of the world? So some commentaries explain to show that he shouldn't later on complain and say we never had a chance, so God comes to them and offers it. Others want to explain because God wanted to show the importance of the Torah to the Jewish people. Everybody refused it, they didn't know its value, and you, the Jewish people, recognize its value. Hasidism has a whole different look at it. It says on the contrary, God is truth. God is not into false marketing. God doesn't need to give us the Torah through false gimmicks. When God went around to the nations of the world was because he was implanting in them a sincere appreciation for godliness. That means that it shouldn't be something which is completely foreign to them. The same way when a person dates somebody, even though they don't marry them eventually, they still have some type of relationship that they had or don't have with them, but there is something in common. So too God wanted to create a commonality to the non-Jew that they should have some influence of the Torah. That's why if you look in the Torah, we spoke about it when we discussed the 10 Commandments. When you look in the Torah, the 10 Commandments are written twice. One time it says Zachor, one time it says Shamor, and there's a few differences. But if you look at the differences that Klayakar, one of the commentators, explain, you'll see that the first set of 10 Commandments are universal. Like it says, remember the Sabbath because God created the universe. The second set of 10 Commandments, God says, remember the Sabbath because he took you out of Egypt. The first set of the 10 Commandments is, so to speak, universal for every single human. And the second set is for the Jewish people. For that reason, you see within the world that the non-Jews have adapted, so to speak, a level of Ten Commandments. For example, gladiators were something that was very common. Today, people don't even kill a cat. People are so careful with animal rights. The ASPCA and PETA and all the other wonderful organizations. Why? Because we automatically created a sensitivity in the world that they're becoming more conscious and more realistic about spirituality that are from the Ten Commandments. Killing, for example. Years ago, go 2,000 years ago, even 1,000 years ago, I didn't like what you said, you were killed. Nobody thought twice. How many people were killed just because they looked the wrong way? Today, there's the Geneva Conventions and there's all the different things that exist in the world to be able to stop wars. But where does it all come from, this type of morality? Who set the standard of morality is the Torah. Everything comes from the Torah today. Go even a little bit further. When we mentioned before Abraham. Abraham at first was ridiculed. He was on one side, everybody else was on the other side. Abraham, nobody believed in belief in God. Belief in one God? You're crazy? He was thrown into the fire because of it. Paganism was the way to go. Today you look in the world, who's the father of 3 major religions that over billions of people believe in? Abraham. Christians, Muslims, and Jews all believe in one God. Or believe that Abraham is the father of the religion. So you see how the dynamic, the appreciation for godliness, the world appreciation of teaching the Seven Noachide Laws is something which is so important in how we approach a non-Jew. And we as the Jewish people should not learn from Noach, so to speak, and this is what the Torah is telling us. Noach was a tzaddik in his generation, but he didn't have an impact on his generation. We have to be learned, and that's why we don't associate ourselves as the Noachites. The non-Jews are from the Noachites. We have to have an impact on the non-Jews. And we have to be a light unto the nations of the children of Avram. Or because Avram was the one that had an impact on the people around him. Avram was the one that turned on the oven and got everybody warm. The ultimate reality is, when Mashiach comes, that then it says that the nations of the world will all come together and see the greatness of Hashem, and see the value of the teachings of the Torah, and see the values of God. Not that we're there to convert them, but they're there to understand and appreciate godliness, spirituality for what it is. And we see today there's already awakening in the world to this level of spirituality, to the respect that they have to give to the Jewish people. As we continue on this step, encouraging our neighbors, Jew and non-Jew alike, in observance of the Seven Noachide Laws, this will bring about ultimately the Mashiach that will see and bring the spirituality to the world.